Shalom, WJC family. It's time for our weekly Torah talk. This week's Torah talk, I want to not only explore our Parsha, Shemot, but recognize that this Tuesday night and Wednesday, we commemorated the yortzeit of one of the great rabbis of the conservative movement, one of the great theologians and thinkers and civil rights activists among the Jewish people of the 20th century, that is Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel. Now, there are a lot of debts I owe to Rabbi Heschel, whether we know it or not, that we all do, for his way of thinking, for his activism. But there's one I want to highlight as we discuss Shemot that maybe we don't think of so often. To highlight this idea, I want to turn to what I would say is a very troubling text in the Parsha, very difficult. It is the text where Moses, having grown up in the palace of the Pharaoh, goes out among the people and he sees a Egyptian taskmaster beating a Hebrew slave. He is filled with compassion for the slave, maybe a fraternal identification because they look the same. They have Semitic features that are different from the Egyptian features. And what does Moses do? He turned this way and that way, and when he saw there was no one there, he struck down the Egyptian and hid him in the sand. On the one hand, this is a very inspiring passage. He's Moses standing up for his people, re-identifying with the Jews. On the other hand, this is murder, right? It doesn't say that the Egyptian was killing this other person. Judaism has very careful laws about these kinds of things. Before, even if he thought that the slave might be in danger for his life, he's supposed to warn the Egyptian. No charge or trial. Remember, he's a prince, right? Why doesn't he call over his forces? He does none of those things. He kills him. I have to tell you, I find this text incredibly, incredibly troubling. Right, this vigilante killing, the likes of which we don't see again until Bamidbar, when we read the story of Pinchas. Is this what we expect from our future leader? The passion for the people, I guess, yes, but the vigilante killing without benefit of charge or trial, troubling. And by the way, it's troubling for Moses too. He is embarrassed by his act. He hides the Egyptian in the sand. When the next day he's talking to some Jewish people and they call him out, he runs away for shame, embarrassment, and in fear for his life. So what do we do with a tradition like this? What do we do when our heroes disappoint us, when the things we love cause us embarrassment, maybe a little shame? In this case, our beloved teacher Moses seems to act in a way of violence, and there are few things in the Bible more embarrassing than violence, especially violence by God. This is what brings us to Dr. Heschel, Rabbi Heschel. Heschel gave me my whole way of thinking and talking about God. Heschel loved God. Heschel was connected to God through these ideas of wonder and awe, and had a sense of the divine in the world and a way of talking about it that gifted that sense of the divine to the rest of us. But that is not what I want to call out today. What I want to call out today is, despite that love of God, despite that love of Judaism, Heschel had things about the tradition that embarrassed him. In his famous book, his doctoral dissertation, The Prophets, a remarkable work, Heschel talks about the embarrassment of God's anger, right? Heschel is embarrassed by God. Think about that. Because sometimes we are embarrassed by the things that we love. Sometimes those that we love disappoint us, they embarrass us, we feel shame in their behavior. Heschel feels that for God's anger, right? In the prophets, God lashes out at the Jewish people time and again. God declares God's anger and indignation. And, Heschel's living in a Christian world. God is supposed to be about love. What is this anger business? This angry, God of the Old Testament becomes an embarrassment until Heschel redefines that anger as part of divine pathos. What is divine pathos? It's that God actually cares about every individual in the universe, everything, every person for sure. Right? God cares, and God gets mad even on the behalf of one person, even if it means anger and punishment for many who are abusing the one. And ultimately, Heschel sees God's anger as an act of love, like the anger of a parent when their child is abused in some way. So by flipping this anger on its head, Heschel finds his way to redefining God's anger as love. And through that is able to reconnect with the divine that Heschel obviously loves so much. That's this chapter, The Meaning and Mystery of Wrath, with its title, The Embarrassment of Anger, can be found on page 358 in the Prophets. Now, what's interesting is that I'm not the only one, I think, who was inspired by this. I had the privilege of studying with former Chancellor Arnie Eisen, Professor Eisen, a class called Prophecy and Politics, the theological underpinnings of Abraham Joshua Heschel and Martin Luther King Jr. And in it, we explored the connection between these two men who were great friends. Of course, Martin Luther King Day will celebrate this coming Monday. And it is known that that this book, The Prophets, was a favorite of MLK, of his lieutenants, men like Ralph Abernathy. They carried this book with them everywhere they went. And we explored it in class with Professor Eisen, that this idea that God loved and cared for every individual was inspiring to the civil rights leaders. And I'm sure it was. But I want to posit that there's another aspect that connected them to this book. And it was the idea that you could love something and still be embarrassed by it. And that you could find a way to reframe that and to move forward still in love. For Martin Luther King Jr., I think that was the United States of America. MLK, Reverend King, Dr. King, clearly loved the United States, loved the Constitution, spoke with reverence in his speeches and his essays about the founding fathers, some of whom, ironically, were slaveholders. But he didn't condemn them for their fatal flaw. He didn't condemn the country for its original sin. He found a way to continue to love the country and still try and work to redefine that embarrassment, to undo the racism that he and his people were still experiencing in the 1960s and that many are still experiencing today. So what spoke to him about the prophets? This idea that we could be embarrassed by what we love and still love. And I think this is an inspiring and important idea for today, because it's not only various texts about violence that are troubling in Judaism today, although there are those, like the one about Moshe killing the Egyptian taskmaster. But there's a lot of things that maybe we love that are causing us embarrassment today. I'm not going to list them. There are so many possibilities, whether they're the kinds of things that bothered Dr. Heschel or Dr. King, or things that are happening in the world in modern day places and with policies of which we are embarrassed. But our job is not, when we feel that way, to turn away. That's what Heschel teaches us in the prophets. That's what Dr. King taught us in all of his magnificent efforts on behalf of civil rights, human rights, the rights of black people and other people of color in this country. We don't turn away from Moses because of his violent act. We find a way to reframe. We find a way to go forward in love. And I hope and pray today, as it is needed so much as ever maybe, as we look at the institutions we love and the places where they are failing us, where they are embarrassing us, the people we're supposed to look up to, the policies that we thought were sacrosanct. So we look at all of that and we feel that sense of shame and embarrassment for our connection to them. Let's not run away. Let's not close off. Let's find a way to reframe, to fix, and redeem. That ultimately was the message of Rabbi Heschel. That ultimately is the message of Reverend King. And it is a message as important to us today as ever. Reframe and redeem. May we all find our way to that redemption as we celebrate the redemption of Shabbat this week. Shabbat Shalom.